Hello, I'm Sara Potecha, and I'm going to be speaking on resilience and microhabits. I'm delighted to be here and get to share with this international audience. And I think this subject is so important because of the world that we currently live in. We're living in a time of unprecedented change brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic. And to begin this discussion, I want to see about my audience here that are able to attend. And I've listed several 2020 stressors, and I'd be curious to know what are some of the stressors that you're currently um, actually experiencing. If you're like most of us, you may have had to change where and how you work. You've had to adapt to new technologies. Maybe you're now working as a geographically member of a geographically dispersed team. Maybe you're trying to lead one of those, which is much more complex. Perhaps with stay-at-home orders, you are homeschooling your children, which means that you have these dual responsibilities that pull at you all the time, and you might have greater disruptions. You maybe have lost a job or have job uncertainty, or someone in your family does. You may have had your own health concerns, or someone you know. I personally know several people that have had COVID-19 and the impact that it's had on their families. You may have, unfortunately, the death of a loved one during this time. And I think for some of us, we've also dealt with a lot of isolation, which can have an impact on us, or even too much togetherness if we're continually around our family. So, all these types of things can have a great impact on our performance because they create stress. And perhaps you've seen this graph before. It basically looks at stress and performance. And what we know is when we have low stress, we also don't perform all that well. But as stress increases, we actually become alert and actually become better performers up to a point where we're at optimal performance. And this can be a really exciting time because that's where we really enjoy our work. The time just flies by because endorphins are in our head. The stress is just the right amount to have our performance peak. However, in the reality of today's world, we are having stress upon stress added to our daily lives. And this can have really difficult and pronounced changes in how we respond to the world around us. In fact, our thinking typically changes with more and more stress so that we become more anxious. And all we can think about is sometimes is the anxiety. If it gets too bad, we become what psychologists call neurobiologically frazzled. And this is a scary place to be because we're very likely to have something called an emotional hijack. Well, when we talk about emotional hijack, we have to talk about the amygdala, that tiny part of our brain that controls our responses to what we see as a perceived threat. Are we going to fight or flee? And it's very interesting because the amygdala, as I show in this picture, is only the size of an almond, yet it controls us like tremendously. And so an emotional hijack is when that amygdala responds out of proportion to the threat at hand. So it's not responding appropriately. What happens in an instant is hormones fill our system. Have you ever been so mad you couldn't see? Well, there's some truth to that because when those hormones come into our body, our vision narrows, our hearing heightens, and our muscles increase because we're getting ready to fight or flee. But what really also happens is our thinking is compromised and our ability to innovate, collaborate, and problem solve shuts down. We're no longer in our prefrontal cortex where rational thought is. We're controlled by the amygdala. And this gets me to talking about something called healthy thoughts and toxic thoughts. Dr. Carolyn Leaf is a neuroscientist who studied the brain and body connection for something like 40 years. One of the things they've discovered is as we think about something, we have a feeling and then a thinking. It tends to get hardwired into our thought process. And when it's a healthy thought, when you look at the neural synapses and what they look like, they do look like trees, but healthy trees. Conversely, a toxic thought also has little branches and roots and such, but it looks unhealthy. And that's exactly what is happening in our bodies. You see, she made the distinction between the mind and the brain. The mind is what we control. The brain is where all the processes going on, and the brain has a connection to the body. And what she's discovered in her research is that 75 to 98% of all illnesses are a direct result of our thought life. Take that in for a minute. Fear triggers 1,400 known physical and chemical responses in our body and activates more than 30 different hormones. Unchecked thoughts create the ideal conditions for illness. So we must have the tools to undo the damage that's caused by toxic thinking. And yet we're seeing the results of this toxic thinking all around us. In fact, a recent research report reported that 45% of all adults reported mental health has been negatively impacted due to the COVID-19 pandemic and all the shutdowns and so on and so forth. Also, 83% of the women and 36% of men have experienced an increase in depression. And 53, more than half of the women and almost 30% of the men have experienced increased anxiety. So toxicity is around there, and it has impacts on our psychological and physical well-being. We need to be aware of what can trigger us. Now, we know that there are several triggers, but we need to be particularly aware of these. Now, not only if these things happen to us, but if we are actually doing that to others. So we have to be very, very careful. We can't be condescending. We have to show respect. If we are treated unfairly, that could trigger us. What if we show a lack of appreciation? Are people feeling that they're just not heard? Dr. Stephen Covey says when we actively listen, we listen to not only the content, but the feeling behind it. And then we let the other person know that we have heard and understand their feeling. When we do that, we give them psychological air. So important. So when we're not feeling heard, it can trigger a reaction in us. What about unrealistic deadlines and demands? So on the one hand, we have to have tools so that we can manage our own emotional response to these kind of triggers, but we also have to be aware that we are not causing them in others. That's why I'm going to talk for the rest of my time with you about these coping skills. And I've been a coach for over 25 years. And really, coping skills are just strategies and techniques to deal with stress. But what I've found is they're easily developed, but they're most underused skills that are right at your fingertips. Because what we're talking about is habits. And what I'd like to share about habits is an analogy that James Clear in his phenomenal book, Atomic Habits, talks about. Now imagine for a moment that you are a pilot and you're going to fly from the LAX airport to New York City. You start the plane, but you are 3.5 degrees off in your calculations. And let's say as you fly across America, you never correct that. Do you think that you're going to land in or near New York City? No, you'll actually land in Washington, D.C. Being a little bit off at the beginning has huge impact at the end. And he said the same thing is what our daily habits are like. They are the compound interest of self-improvement. If we have good habits that we use repeatedly, they compound in their impact on us. And that's what I'm going to be talking about with you today. As an example, another whole study wanted to understand why the top tennis players in the world, and there's only like 10 male and female, that seem to stay at the very top of the game for years on end. And then there's like 200 or so that never quite get there. And they wanted to know what was the big difference between the very top of the game and those that are in the top tier but never get to the top. So they studied them. They studied everything from their nutrition to their musculature to their resting periods and all the things that, nutrition. And you know what? They didn't discover very many differences between the most elite and those just under that tier. So they looked a little closer. at the very top tennis players. And they discovered the difference was what they did between shots. These little tiny habits that they did, that's what they understood made the difference for them to have superior performance that was continually done. They had the resilience to stay in there. Tiny little micro habits, not macro, such as their eating habits, but my tiny little habits that became part of their daily and daily routine. Every time they took a shot, it was little things that they did between the shots that made all the difference. And that's what I'm going to present to you as what you can do for yourself to get and build resilience during unprecedented amount of change brought on by COVID-19. So do not discount these. What we also know in human development is it's much more difficult to take on a big change in habit than it is tiny little adjustments. You're more likely to have success with tiny little adjustments. For example, it's a whole lot easier to commit to running 5 minutes a day than training for a marathon. So one of these habits is going to be deep breathing. Now, I want to take you through a couple exercises with this, but I think the first thing you need to know is that most of us breathe pretty shallowly all day long. We hardly fill our lungs at all. And that has a compounding effect of keeping a lot of toxins in our body, especially when we're under stress. So what we want you to do is when you breathe in, you're going to put one hand on your stomach because you want to so fill your lungs that your stomach will, your lower diaphragm actually is being filled. And so your stomach will come out a little bit. And when you breathe in through your nose, you're going to hold it for a couple seconds and then breathe out through your mouth. And it takes longer to breathe out from your mouth. So I want you to be in a relaxed situation. You can close your eyes. I want you to just focus on the breath. And we're only going to do this 5 times. So let us begin. Breathe in. Slowly let it out. Again, breathe in and hold it. Once more. Breathe in. Last time. Breathe in. Now, I bet you're feeling even calmer. Notice that I'm slower in my speaking as a result. But so many wonderful things are going on in your body right now. First, you're getting rid of a lot of the cortisol. If you had stress up to this moment, you've gotten rid of that and you've replaced it with endorphins. Now, of course, ideally, you would do this for a longer period of time than I was able to show you, but maybe start by doing it for 10 deep breaths and gradually build up so you do it for 1 or 2 minutes. And what you'll also find is that your body will become detoxified and you'll improve your immunity because when you're under stress, you're more likely to catch a cold or get sick. But this is a good way to cleanse that because you're getting yourself into a calm state. And we know from research this lowers blood pressure, will actually improve your digestion and help support a proper posture. So there's many reasons to begin to do that. Research has shown that people that worked in toxic work environments started employing deep breathing for a couple minutes, several times a day, and within 2 weeks, they enjoyed their jobs much more. I've also seen with those that have done this, you can employ deep breathing even when you're on the phone with someone who's getting your ire up to calm you, or even on a conference call. You can be breathing a couple times so that you remain calm. And when you remain calm, others will have a difficult time getting upset because you're modeling calmness. They'll tend to actually mirror you. So remaining calm is a great way to have influence over those that you need to, are those you need to calm down. Another tiny habit, so impactful, so compounding in its effect, is drinking enough water. It's really this hydration. And it's because our bodies are 70% water, but our brains are 85% water. So when we do not get enough water, we could experience headaches, we will feel more tired, and if we really let ourselves go, we can have seizures. But not having enough water throughout the day, you will find that your energy level will be lower. You'll feel more tired and more prone to stress. So, how much water should you drink? Well, most most researchers recommend at least 64 ounces of water a day. If you exercise or you're in a hot climate, obviously you need to drink more than that. So, that's a basic minimum. And to make it a tiny habit, I suggest drinking every 15 minutes. In fact, it's time for me to do that. If you drink every 15 minutes, you'll have no problem getting 64 ounces of water in your day. You could also get a bottle like the one I show on the screen here that kind of encourages you throughout the day to keep drinking, keep drinking. But here's the deal. You cannot substitute coffee or tea or soda or something or fruit juice for drinking water. It's got to be water that's going to go right into your system. And research says it will prevent and treat stress, depression, fatigue, and helps support a healthy weight or weight loss if you need to lose weight. So again, a tiny little habit that you can incorporate. Another tiny habit that you will take a little more time to use is incredibly important because as you are dealing with life, and as we've already discussed, the amount of stressors that could be compounding you, often you will find yourself overwhelmed. For me, when that happens, I get a sense in my stomach. I just know that I'm anxious. And so Dr. Leaf came up with this mental autopsy methodology. I'll give you an example. Just this week, I've been working on several different projects, and one was not coming together the way I'd like it. So I was feeling anxious about it, and I recognized it because I was working on something else, and I kept thinking about it. So taking step one, I recognized it, I named it. I had anxiety because I don't feel comfortable about project B, let's call it. So I embraced the issue. And at the time, I didn't have a moment to really think deeply about it. So I scheduled time on my calendar when I could take like a half hour or 20 minutes to really think about it. And so I did later that day think really deeply by asking a series of why is that? Why is that? So why am I feeling anxious? Well, I'm depending on other people for the little bits and pieces of this project to get done. And why is that upsetting me? Because I'm not getting that information. And why does that upset you? Well, let's go back. I realized that I had not asked for a constant update. I had not asked for the very things that were causing me angst. And then in step 3, she has you write out those very thoughts. And this is incredibly powerful. It's about putting your thoughts on paper that you suddenly see, oh, that's what's going on here. That's where I discovered her step 4, the patterns. The patterns were I had agreed to a project without setting proper guidelines or ways of working with this group of folks. And I hadn't clearly communicated what I needed to do my part of the project. And because I could see it laid out there right in front of me, I easily saw a plan of action. I needed to communicate with them and tell them what I needed. And once I began to act on that plan, that stress went away. That anxiety went away. So a simple little 5-step process that you could employ when you feel a bit overwhelmed, when anxiety starts taking over. You don't let it fester. You take action so the toxic thought doesn't have control over you. You have control over your thinking. The last and very important micro habit I want to discuss is this idea of sleep. To begin talking about it, I want to quote from Dr. Matthew Walker, who's written an incredible book about sleep. And he spent 20 years really studying it. And he's concluded that the single most effective activity we can do to reset our brain and body health is a good night's sleep. Now, how can we get a good night's sleep if we're full of anxious thoughts? And again, that's why some of these habits build on each other. It's called habit stacking. But let me just tell you the importance of sleep. You see, all day long, in fact, 24/7, our brain never stops working. But while we're awake and we're working, it's doing mental gyrations, it's doing calculations, it's learning new things, it's absorbing new things, it's keeping track of a variety of different things. There's a lot of work going on and it creates toxins in your brain. And when we go to sleep, we don't just immediately go to sleep. We start in a stage one where it's light sleep and we're easily awakened. In stage two, eye movement and brain waves slow down. And then stage three, the delta waves begin to appear. Stage four, no eye movement, muscle activity, and it's very difficult to wake us up. At this point, we're in something called non-REM sleep. And finally, we get into REM sleep, where breathing becomes more rapid, irregular, and shallow. And the truth is that we bounce between non-REM, REM, and lighter stages of sleep all night long. But why are these stages important? Well, the non-REM is where we do all the reflection, that we've incorporated all this learning throughout the day. And then we go and kind of mentally sort through it about stuff we're going to throw out. That information is no longer any good. And we recategorize where the new information is going to be stored. And then we get rid of some of those toxins. But in REM, this is where we integrate and dream and innovate and problem solve. But here's the deal. It takes time to get into stage four and REM stage. It could take an hour, could take less than that, could take 90 minutes, could take 2 hours. So if you don't give yourself what Dr. Walker says, sleep opportunity, you're probably shortchanging how much time you have in each of these stages. He recommends at least 7 to 8.5 hours of sleep opportunity. So that means you can't work until the very last minute and then expect to go to sleep at midnight and get up at 6 because you're not giving yourself what you need for restorative sleep that does all the things you're supposed to do to restore your brain and your body. So what are some tiny habits so that you can do this? Well, I've kind of called this sleep hygiene. We know that regular exercise will help you sleep better. Now, it's kind of a macro thing, but even a little exercise a day, 20 minutes, will probably help you sleep better. But most importantly, you have to prepare yourself for sleep. Do quiet activities before bed. The use of aromatherapy and soft sounds will have a calming effect on your body. To employ the deep breathing that we just learned about and muscle relaxation techniques will help you fall asleep better. Now, there's things you can avoid. You don't want to medicate with alcohol or sleeping aids. Now, if you're prescribed a sleeping aid, that's different, not a doctor. But we do know that when you medicate or have alcohol too close to bedtime, you're probably going to wake up sometime in the night. You're not going to get into the non-REM and REM sleep where so many important functions are done. Also, if you consume rich foods too close to bedtime, it's going to interrupt that deep sleep. So have dinner at 6 or 7, go to sleep 11 or so. You've had time to digest the food somewhat. And stop with the TV in the bedroom or looking at your laptop or your phone. Get the blue screen out of your bedroom so that it'll actually interfere with getting into deep sleep. So tiny little habits that will improve your sleeping patterns so that you can be successful and be able to be more resilient the next day. So I conclude by saying that 2020 certainly has brought challenge, difficulty, and disruption to many of our lives. And with that comes stress. And stress can have a negative impact because it can create those toxic thoughts that have impacts on our mental and physical health. But remember that micro habits that I've suggested have the compound interests of self-improvement. They will compound to give you the resilience you need for each and every endeavor. So I suggest incorporating one tiny habit for a few months and then adding another until you've done all 4 of these. And there's more to come of these micro habits. But I think these are 4 of the most powerful but simple tiny habits that can lead to greater resilience. I want to thank you for your time. And as my gift to you, just go to my website, type in www.sarapatecha.com/BTOES, and you can download 2 chapters of my book, West Point Woman, which is the story of being one of the first women to graduate from the United States Military Academy. It's a story of overcoming adversity through and learning leadership lessons as part of that story. So if you'll just go there, you'll be able to download 2 chapters of that. And please follow me. I do something every a day called a leadership gem that you can check out on my LinkedIn and my Facebook page. But here's my contact information. And I truly have enjoyed this time with you. Thank you again. And may you have health and may you have resilience.